Welcome to The Climate Show with me, Tom Heap. In 7 days, when the records for temperature may have been safe, but drought records are buckling. It has been the driest July for more than a century, on top of a pretty parched year. And 2 parts of the British Isles have announced a hosepipe ban. Over in the US, they're still plagued by deadly weather extremes. But there's also been a promising political breakthrough in Washington, and we'll bring you news on both. We'll be looking back on the life of the scientist and inventor James Lovelock, whose Gaia Theory helped shape how we think about our world. And we're going to start by digging below the dust, ashes and political weeds to something close to Dr. Lovelock's heart, the soil itself. The growing medium for so much of life on Earth is in trouble. A third of the world's soils are degraded, meaning its ability to support plants and animals is diminished. It's vanishing too. Each year, the UN estimates around 75 billion tonnes are eroded from croplands, just washed or blown away. But it could be one of our most effective tools in the fight against climate change. If we treat our soils right, they could suck up 4 to 5 billion tonnes more carbon each year. That's 10% of humanity's greenhouse gas emissions. And that could happen quickly. Soil may not look much, but it is amazing. It teems with unseen creatures, is at the root of nearly all our food, and even has the uncanny ability to bring death back to life. So, how come in recent years we've treated it like dirt? Farming practices across much of the world damage soil by slicing it up with ploughs, threatening its biology with chemicals, and now we know the climate is paying a price too. Carbon dioxide escapes from the earth and warms the atmosphere. But here on a research farm in Devon, the scientists are fighting back. Here at Northwick, they monitor pretty much everything, not only what goes onto the field, but also what comes off it in terms of the gases and also things held in the water. They reckon this is the most instrumented farm in the world. Andy, why are we all talking about soil and frankly rather worried about it?
Well, soil should be a natural reservoir for organic carbon. Theoretically, it should be holding more carbon in soil than we see in the atmosphere and the above-ground biomass.
Yeah.
But the way we're growing our food is really having quite a detrimental effect on the amount of organic matter that we have in our soils.
So tell me about the 2 clumps you've got in your hand.
So, well, let's start with the good one. The soil here is from a permanent pasture that we have here on site. You'll notice that there's lots of fibrous roots in there. It breaks apart. It has a lovely structure. It falls apart quite nicely.
It's almost kind of hairy, look.
It is very hairy.
Pick it up by its own hairs.
Yeah, there's a lot of root mass in there. Now, if we compare that to soil that we take out of this barley field, this has only been used for growing cereals for 3 years, but you can already see that the quality of the soil structure is completely different. This is more like a brick, whereas this is more like a sponge.
But Andy, along with many climate scientists, believes soil can be turned into an ally in the fight against climate change.
Our mistreatment of soil over the last century or so does mean that we have an opportunity here to correct that and get some of that carbon dioxide back out of the atmosphere.
But there's a problem. Our chemical fertilisers and industrial farming have given us bumper harvests. And with the war in Ukraine threatening food supply, feeding the world has to be a priority. Can we bring carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere into the soil while still maintaining levels of food production?
Our experiments suggest that you can get close using purely organic matter, so composted farmyard manure, for instance. But our highest yielding plots are the ones that combine farmyard manure with a little bit of bagged nitrogen. So a combination of organic and inorganic probably gets us the highest yields, but also benefits the soil.
40 miles to the south, the new manager of this farm has gone cold turkey on chemicals and intensive farming, choosing to build soil health instead.
The opportunity is to turn this around and to demonstrate that farming can actually be a hero of the climate crisis.
Tim Williams took over here just 18 months ago.
This was a conventional arable farm. The soil in itself, the structure's quite damaged, and so trying to return the health back to the soil. And so to do that, one of the first things that I do is put livestock back into the system.
And he's growing different crops and grasses, ending fertiliser use and stopping ploughing, a core farming practice.
Basically, by ploughing, you're completely inverting the soil, so you're destroying the homes of all the worms and the fungi and the bacteria. You imagine the soil as London. You've got skyscrapers, you've got little houses, you've got rivers, you've got tubes, you know, the underground, and basically by ploughing, you're destroying those homes, and yeah, complete destruction essentially.
Farming like this isn't just a way to fight climate change. As fertiliser prices spike, it could also wean us off our addiction to increasingly expensive chemicals. Maybe now it's soil's time to shine. This rediscovered respect for soil isn't just for farmers. I've become a bit obsessed about it in my own little plot. Every scrap of food and nearly all the clippings from the garden are earthbound, as you can see here. And after sitting here for a year, all this stuff gets spread on the allotment here, under this plastic, and it sits there for about another 12 months, hopefully making very happy soil. It's nice to think our gardens could be storing carbon alongside yielding a few spuds, beans and greens. And healthier soils hold more water too, something of growing importance as our summers get drier. And to find out how gardeners may need to adapt, I've been to the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew to talk to their curator of living collections, great title, Simon Toomer.
It's been extremely dry. We haven't had any real rain for probably well over a month now, really. We've had a few sprinklings, but they don't really make a lot of difference. So, no, it's pretty parched.
What's suffering as a result?
Yeah, particularly some of the summer flowering plants, some of the things like roses don't enjoy this kind of weather, dahlias, gladiola, you know, those summer flowering bulbs, and particularly some of the young trees. Most plants go through quite a vulnerable period when they've just been planted, and if that coincides with this kind of weather, you know, they don't like it at all, actually, so we are having to water some of the young trees.
A question about grass. I mean, it's clearly brown around us here, whether or not you mind the look of it. Is brown grass dead grass?
No, I mean, grass is really well adapted actually to these kind of conditions, although it looks dreadful. You know, it is able to survive and always comes back. I mean, I've seen this kind of conditions a few times, and remarkably, it will come back, yeah.
If we are moving into an era of possibly hotter, drier summers, what plants or trees do you think we're going to see more of?
Well, we're sitting here at Kew in part of the garden we call the Mediterranean garden, and actually, you know, the clue's in the name to some extent. You know, if we look south, you know, we see the kind of plants that are growing in the climate that we're almost certainly going to have in the future. So we're looking at things. Some of them are quite familiar garden plants, actually, rosemary, bay, cistus, you know, the rock roses, all those kinds of plants. We can even see olives and cork oak in this part of the garden. But there's also a lot of the other plants that aren't going to disappear. You know, even we may have to adapt our choice of roses, for example, and they will survive. You know, we will still see those in our garden, but we are undoubtedly going to see a different kind of palette, or a different palette of plants in the future.
What about what's around us here? These things we might see more of?
Yeah, the pines are stone pine, Mediterranean pine species, and they're the tree that give us the little pine nuts that we use in pesto. We've also got a rosemary there, and the little dwarf palm. Anyone who spends time in the Mediterranean, a place like Mallorca, will be familiar with that plant.
So you think there's beauty to be found in a dry garden, is there?
There is, and you know, the examples you've given there are not particularly colourful. I mean, I think they're very attractive in their own way, and they complement other things, but there's no reason to think we can't still have a really nice, floriferous, beautiful, colourful gardens, just that it's going to be different, and we're going to have to manage them in a different way.
Some great tips from Simon there, and we seem to have gone for a bit of a clothing echo. Coming up after the break, a glimpse of a positive breakthrough in Washington as a US Democratic senator has announced his surprise support to pass the largest climate investment in the country's history. Welcome back to the show in a week that might go down as one of the most significant in American efforts to fight climate change. A surprise breakthrough in normally deadlocked Washington politics enables the largest ever federal investment in clean energy and a total climate change spending package of $370 billion. Now, that is a big chunk of change by any measure, and to give you a comparison, it's nearly twice as much as we spend on the NHS each year. So might the shift in political mood be down to continuing extreme weather, convincing more voters that climate change is a real and present danger? Just this week, several people were killed in extraordinary flash floods in Kentucky, while St. Louis, Missouri also saw unprecedented rainfall and flooding. Much of the Pacific Northwest region has roasted. Temperatures hit nearly 39 degrees in the city of Portland, with the state's mayor declaring a state of emergency. Between 2,000 and 3,000 cattle were reported killed by the excessive heat in Kansas, one of the big beef-producing states. Meanwhile, intense wildfires have hit Alaska, unlike anything seen before. In a place more associated with snow, more than 500 fires have burnt across the state this year. And fire season took off dramatically in California when a blaze ripped through land near Yosemite National Park. Joe Pike reports.
While Washington witnessed a breakthrough, California burned. The largest, fastest-growing fire this season. Battling it, 3,000 firefighters, including Jeremy Snyder and his battalion. They work 24-hour shifts.
It's mentally and physically challenging.
And after 25 years in the job, he has noticed a change.
We're seeing that growth and that fire activity earlier and earlier every year.
And do you think that climate change has played a role in all of this?
Yeah, there's definitely, something that's happened over the last couple of years. 10 years, we've definitely seen a lot more fire growth, rapid fire growth, intense fires that are burning through communities like we haven't seen really in the past.
They are fighting to save the homes of people like Jacqueline and Peter, Native Americans and climate campaigners who believe global warming is a big factor in the crisis they're now facing.
They say, if it doesn't affect me, it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
But it's affecting both of you.
But it's affecting both of us.
It's affecting everybody.
It's affecting everybody.
Yeah.
And for people who are watching this who don't believe in climate change, what would you say to them?
I'd say pay attention, really pay attention to what's going on with the earth and why it's different, because it is.
We need to stop being so selfish.
The drive into the evacuated area is eerie. Just a few days ago, this was green woodland, but the change now is dramatic. At first, for a split second, it almost feels like a winter scene because there are no leaves on the trees and they have this slightly white grey colour. But of course, that's not snow, it's ash. And this isn't winter, it's the height of summer. Cars have been left as metal skeletons, homes utterly destroyed. Wildfires are nothing new in California, and there are a range of reasons for them. The intense drought, parched vegetation, low humidity, high heat. But climate change has contributed to all of that. If you live here, it is unavoidable. And yet in this country, it remains a divisive issue.
Constitution of the United States.
Elected on a promise of climate action,
Congratulations, Mr. President.
Joe Biden has struggled to turn his hopes into reality, partly due to one of his own Democratic senators.
In West Virginia, we understand that climate change is real.
Joe Manchin represents coal country and, in a finely balanced Congress, had been blocking progress until now.
This bill would be the most significant legislation in history to tackle the climate crisis and improve our energy security right away.
The multi-billion-dollar legislation could be approved within days, but California's wildfire season will continue for months. Joe Pike, Sky News.
And as ever, you can find more details on that story and all our other climate content by scanning this QR code or on skynews.com/climate. So, big developments in the actual and political weather in the US this week. What about here in the UK? Drought has been the big story, and I've been talking to Sky's Caterina Vitozzi, who's in the Isle of Man, where they declared the year's first hosepipe ban. Hi, Caterina. First thing, I can see a lot of grey clouds behind your head. Any hint of rain?
Well, the forecast says it was going to be dry, and actually when I was speaking to some people here who had been doing beautiful walks around this reservoir, the forecast is for it to be continually dry over the next couple of days, but it looks like there is some strong sunshine behind those clouds, so unfortunately that much needed rain, I don't think it's going to come anytime soon.
So, hosepipe ban there, and now we've heard elsewhere as well.
Yeah, so I'm on the Isle of Man. It's where, as you say, the first hosepipe ban has come into force. It's quite in an interesting situation here, and talking to the utility companies that have introduced this temporary usage ban, which we all know as hosepipe bans, they say it's very much a precautionary measure. Here on the Isle of Man, they've got reservoir supply only. It's not like in other parts of the country where they, draw on rivers and there might be aquifers. Here it's very much reservoir first, and they really need to guard that supply because it's finite and it's very much dependent on what falls out of the sky.
And it does tell us something, that this water stress isn't just limited to the southeast. It goes quite a way across the country. I know the Northern Ireland and the far west of Scotland have had it pretty wet, but most of the rest of the country seems pretty parched.
Yeah, the Isle of Man in the northwest, not typically an area you would think struggles for much in the way of rain, but they say it's been dry here, and like many parts of the country, when we saw those higher temperatures last week and the warm weather around that, they saw a peak in demand by about 20%. And as I say, the supply they have here is finite. I don't think it was very surprising to see the news from Southern Water that it was also going to be introducing a hosepipe ban when we were having discussions about what were the driest parts of the UK. The messages we were getting from the Environment Agency was very much Southern England, Eastern England, and also Yorkshire as well. But clearly, as you say, it's not just those areas that have been affected.
But I understand a very different nature of water supply in that Southern Water region, so mainly coming from groundwater. So why have they decided to bring in the hosepipe ban there?
So they say there is no risk at the moment to customer water supply, so drinking water effectively, but they say what is at risk at the minute is the habitats that surround two major rivers. It's the River Itchen and the River Test. And Southern Water, we understand at the moment, is the only water company that's applied for what's known as a drought permit, so that if we do get into the stage of an official drought, they would be able to use extra amounts of water from those rivers to enhance supply. But sort of by going in preemptively with this hosepipe ban, they hope that by sort of managing demand, they can avoid having to over-extract from these rivers, because there are precious habitats and organisms that rely on these riverine environments. Fish in some parts of the country, in some parts of England, in Shropshire, they have also got crayfish that have been massively affected. So there are precious river environments that we know as water levels drop are already seeing an impact. We don't have to wait, or they don't have to wait for there to be an official drought to feel the impact of these dropping river levels.
Caterina, thanks very much. The connectivity of nature and our place within it, witnessed in the current drought, would have been well understood by a pioneer of environmental thinking who died this week. James Lovelock created the Gaia Theory, named for the Greek goddess of Earth, which sees the world as a living organism, somewhat threatened by human behaviour. He was 103. Well, joining me to discuss his work and his legacy is Tim Lenton, Professor of Climate Change and Earth System Science at the University of Exeter. Tim, thanks very much for joining us. Just before we get to his, if you like, professional contribution, you knew him as a friend.
Yeah, he was a wonderful man, Jim. Very humble, wicked sense of humour, enormous fun to be around, really. and someone I owe a huge debt of gratitude to, because he set me on my own personal scientific path right from when I was an 18-year-old kid. And I wrote to him saying, I'm so inspired by your books, I really want to study this. And he had the humility to write back and invite me to meet him, and it all started from there.
Wow, amazing. Now, this idea of a sort of connected Earth is kind of familiar to us now, but when did he come up with the Gaia Theory? And I guess was it pretty revolutionary then?
It certainly was, because it was 1965 when he started thinking this way. And he came to this idea not by thinking about the Earth, but because he was employed by NASA in the design of what became the Viking missions to land on Mars and look to see if there was life on Mars. And Lovelock's key insight was, hold on, if there's life on any planet, it's going to show up in the composition of the atmosphere. And maybe we don't actually need to go to Mars to work out if there's life there. And then he looked back at the Earth and saw, oh yeah, the Earth has this extraordinary atmosphere dominated by 20% oxygen made by living things, complete chemical cocktail of stuff that reacts together all the time. Yeah. And yet it's stable over huge periods of time. So then he intuited, wow, life could be both creating and regulating the composition of the atmosphere, and with that, the climate.
Yeah.
And in the mid to late 60s, wow, that's so far ahead of his time.
Well, indeed, and you were talking about long periods of time, and he was born in 1919. I mean, the amount of environmental change you'd have witnessed in that more than a century is kind of staggering, isn't it?
And I think that really shaped his sensitivity for the Earth and for Gaia, because he'd grown up with his father, a naturalist who taught him the birds by their song, the different flowers in the hedgerows, and then he saw, you know, industrial agriculture kill off those birds and the butterflies and everything else, and he saw the world he knew near him changing. He'd grown up in Brixton in London, and I think that must have informed his sensitivity he had for, blimey, we're profoundly disrupting our life support system. And then he gave us this amazing insight into that life support system on a planetary scale.
Well, Tim, you must be really missing such a powerful thinker and influential man. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, Tom.
Now, we've not had much time for many of your questions this week, but here is one. Wayne asks, in the light of water shortages and the fires we saw here in the UK last week, whether we could use seawater to both put out wildfires and prevent them by soaking the land. And the answer to that is, in short, yes and no. In an emergency, water is scooped up from the sea by firefighting aircraft like this one off a beach in Spain and dumped on or near a blaze to hold it back. But Dr. Joel Hershey from the National Oceanography Centre told us that in the long term, seawater can be very damaging. Only a few terrestrial plants, such as mangroves, like these ones in Senegal, can live on seawater. The salt content otherwise actually dehydrates most plants and causes them to die. And of course, we'd like more questions from you. So go to skynews.com/climate or any of our social media accounts and put in your questions and comments. Well, that's all we've got time for this week. But if you have any spare moments, whether it's on your garden or just in your window box, don't forget to show a little love for your soil. Bye.